Guys, at the time of writing this, I've just seen an advert for Aldi that I think might be bringing on a migraine. Anyone fancy a podcast? Well, here we are then. Off the Rails podcast episode 30, the fortnightly video games podcast, what I, the offrailgamer, hosts, is turning the big 3-0. That's a lot of candles for it to have to blow out, though still not quite as many as me recently, and that, as I'm sure you'll agree, must mean that I am very old indeed. Though I guess you knew that already given my gaming childhood I've described in previous episodes. Now hear this. I've genuinely been on the road again, and I'm quite excited to tell you about the trip. The majority of it fits quite neatly under what I've been playing recently, so I'm going to get into that segment quite promptly this week. First though, allow me to direct your attention to the podcast episode description where you'll find links to all my social media and also my email address where you can write me with anything that's on your mind. Keep it clean and don't be mean, and I just might read it out in the next podcast's listeners' whispers. Right, let's crack on. Here's what I've been up to recently. What's the crack then? Well, I was recently on the road again. Not quite venturing as far north, but driving all the way up to Manchester, the city that gave us bands like the Smiths, the Happy Mondays, Stone Roses, Joy Division, and Oasis. Well, it can be forgiven that last one for all the other great music it's given us. And music was the reason for my journey, though not to see any of the aforementioned bands. I instead went to see prog metal band Tool. And they were frickin' awesome again. It was only my second time seeing them live, but I was super excited. Anyway, this segment is called What I've Been Playing Recently, and not What I've Been Watching Recently. But it does tell you why I was back in Manchester, and, if you recall, when I visited last year, I went to retro arcade bar NQ64. Well, this year, I learned that they have two of them, and I ended up in the other one. I started out on the light gun games, playing a little Point Blank and Ninja Assault, both games that I have for the PS1 and PS2 respectively at home, but it was nonetheless fun to get to experience them on the arcade setup. I did let myself down badly on Ninja Assault though, busting out before getting very far into it at all. Moving round the room, I had a bit of a play on the now, well, it should perhaps be described as vintage more than retro, arcade classic Defender, in which you zip about a landscape shooting aliens out of the sky before they succeed in abducting the people walking in the hills below. I don't remember every cabinet I visited that evening, but they had Pac-Man, Crazy Taxi, Dance Dance Revolution, and a game I didn't expect to see in an arcade, one of my favourite games I owned on the PS1 as a kid, and still own to this day in fact, NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC, which is of course a basketball game. Before the end of the night, we picked up the GameCube controllers and played some Mario Kart Double Dash, which I would probably have to say is the best Mario Kart game, in my humble opinion at least. And that's a really good place to leave my time in NQ64, because the next morning we were booked into Chaos Karts, which is definitely not just Mario Kart IRL, but my word, this experience was such a blast! Racers climb into go-karts, but unlike normal go-karting, the track is projected onto the floor. This means the tracks can be changed between races, but even more, there are pickup boxes you can drive over to pick up weapons you can use to attack your fellow racers. Chaos Karts isn't all about speed and getting around the course in the quickest time, although you can earn an honourable mention for this. You win by accumulating the most points, and you earn points with each successful hit with these weapons. Hey guys, guess what? And this is no word of a lie, by the way. I won at Chaos Karts and picked up the awards for most kills and greatest accuracy. I did it for you, my Organauts. This was a win for us. I've also been sticking with Monster Hunter and reached that high rank status. I'm still pretty much fighting a lot of the same monsters for now, but they're just a little bit tougher. It's with some small amount of trepidation, then, that I'm looking forward to one day reaching Master rank and seeing what new beasts might be thrown my way. So far, I think the monsters I've had the most fun going up against are the Kuliyaku, which is a kind of giant chicken that puts me in mind of the Kutku from the Freedom games on PSP, and the Pookie Pookie, which has the face of a chameleon and a big ol' licky tongue. On YouTube, I did a lovely 2.5-hour stream where we played Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons to completion. I talked about Brothers a few weeks ago when I gave my rundown of my top 10 favourite video games to date, and you might remember I hold it in fairly high esteem, so I should think it will be some time before anything comes along to take its place. If ever. I have to tell you though, that even playing through it for the I don't know how many times at this point, I was still genuinely wowed by its beautiful graphics and the unflinching nature with which it tells its story. It's also been given a bit of a graphical remaster on Steam, so we'll almost certainly be taking a look at that in a future stream down the line. For now though, you can always catch the VOD over on my YouTube. Offline, I've also been playing a decent amount of Holio, a mobile game that's a bit like Donut County, only you compete against other online players. In short, you're a hole in the ground and your mission is to grow the most by swallowing objects. But watch out, because bigger holes can also swallow smaller holes, which of course isn't a problem when you're the biggest hole on the map. And no, I wasn't calling anyone names when I said that, but listen, because here's the exciting part. You can play Holio on the Nintendo Switch, and I managed to grab it for free with my Nintendo eStore points, so suck on those eggs. I think you can pick it up for around 99p if you're on Switch. And at the time of writing the script for this podcast, I was also planning on streaming some Jak and Daxter either on Twitch or TikTok. We'll know by the time you're listening to this whether that was a success or not. And I say that because my game cap had been glitching in streams. I think this was because I was using an old Elgato, the software for which could only be downloaded from their archive files, so I think the glitching may have been where the software is no longer supported. Anyway, I've since invested in a new capture card, so fingers crossed we can put those issues behind us. And as I've invested in new infrastructure for streaming, I'm hoping to find the time to put it to good use, meaning I'm planning on streaming more regularly going forwards. Well anyway, that's what I've been playing recently. No one's written in to Listener's Whispers this time, and I've no gaming news for you either. So let's jump straight into the main part of the show, shall we? Organauts, you may have noticed that we effectively have a series within a series. Every fortnight we continue the podcast series Off the Rails in general, but every now and then I throw in an episode where I give you a bit of offrailgamer backstory, and we have a look at some of the consoles I grew up with. Way back in episode 1, for example, I told you about my very earliest introduction to video games with the Sega Master System. And we've since covered the first games machine I could officially call my own, the Nintendo Game Boy, and indeed the Game Boy Color, with no U. Well, now it's time for us to take another trip down memory lane, as I want to reminisce about the console that really transformed gaming into something much more akin to modern day. I am of course talking about the Sony PlayStation, or PS1 as it later became known after the launch of the PS2. The PlayStation was released in Japan in December 1994, and the rest of the world got their hands on it the following year. But at this time, I was still playing the Sega Master System, and it wouldn't be until Christmas 1999 that we would welcome a new game console into the home. I may have told the story previously, so I'll skip over the details. But with the PlayStation, I received a bundle of 4 games: V-Rally Championship Edition 2, Monaco Grand Prix Racing Simulator 2, Mickey's Wild Adventure, and the first game I ever played on the system, and the first game I'm going to talk about today. When I first played Doom, I have to say I was very jumpy. I'd only really experienced 8-bit side-scrolling platformers up till now, and this 3D first-person shooter, or FPS, if you know, you know, was an entirely different beast. In the PlayStation version, you don't have a soundtrack to run around blasting enemies away to. It's a much more atmospheric game. The silence of space broken only by occasional distant grunts and groans emitted by the various hellspawn you're going to encounter. I still like jumping into Doom to this day, much more so than my first introduction at least, which left me visibly shaken. It's great fun though, collecting bigger and more powerful weapons to blast away demon soldiers, imps, cacodemons, and other nightmare creatures occupying this hellish dimension. Because that's the story to Doom as told in the manual. Scientists have been conducting experiments with teleportation between moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos. They'd ramped things up and had sent some Marines through, but had inadvertently opened a portal to hell. You're now tasked with going in after the squad to see if there are any survivors and to close the gates to the underworld. Another notable title that I was strictly speaking probably too young to be playing was GTA 2. Yes, this was back in the day when Grand Theft Auto had you looking down on your playable character and the city from a bird's eye view, and not the fella who's charging £8 for his fishy fingers, the dirty old sod. In GTA 2 there were different gangs you could work for, including Zaibatsu, Yakuza, and the Loonies, who are identifiable by driving around in green cars with a big yellow smiley painted on the roof. Although GTA 3 showed us a 3D world to run around in and really made the series what it is today, many of the things you'd be doing in 3 were already well established in GTA 2. For example, you'd be fitting out vehicles with car bombs or spray painting your ride so cops would be searching for a car with a different description. There were mini games you could play, including going on killing sprees if you picked up certain weapons while exploring. GTA 2 was effectively part of a trilogy, a sequel at least, to Grand Theft Auto and the GTA extra missions found in GTA London, which takes you back in time to the swingin' 60s. Well, the first Austin Powers film had come out and was culturally a massive deal at the time. But the reason I jumped straight ahead to GTA 2 is because that's the game Little Me, legally distinguished from Mini Me, was playing. In fact, I finally added GTA and GTA London to my collection in just the last year. And now I'm going to recount to you the GTA mission that has always stuck in my mind. Beware, it is nasty, so if you're at all faint of heart, please skip ahead 30 seconds or so. I should be done talking about it by then. So, in this one particular mission, you're told to whack a guy who's proven to be a nuisance to one of the gangs, but it doesn't stop there. You've then got to dispose of the body, which you take to a sausage processing factory to have ground up. Then, as if things hadn't gone far enough, you cruise around the city as a hot dog vendor selling your freshly made snacks. Alright, I think we can leave it there, and let's talk about a game that was less inappropriate for one so young as my past self to be playing. In fact, this game's lead character could almost be considered a bit of a mascot for Sony way back when, with Crash Bandicoot appearing in a lot of their advertising. But yet again, it was Crash Bandicoot 2, Cortex Strikes Back, that I owned as a child, and honestly, this was, and still is in my opinion, such a gem of a game. The level designs were varied, utilising the 3D potential of the new Sony console's capabilities perfectly. Some of the most treacherous levels saw you running from boulders or angry polar bears towards the camera, meaning you couldn't see upcoming electric fence obstacles or pitfalls, sometimes until it was almost too late and would require lightning-fast reactions from you to avoid falling foul of them. But a big part of Crash Bandicoot games that, while I don't think this gets overlooked at all, I do think doesn't necessarily get the appreciation it deserves, and that is the game's soundtrack. As soon as you hear it, you know immediately that's a Crash Bandicoot game. Anyway, I certainly had a summer holiday sunk into Crash 2 one year. It's an excellent platformer fronted by a cool central character, and the game boasts a decent enough sense of humour as well. Let's keep all our twos together, shall we? You know what's coming, as I've pretty much devoted an episode to this game previously, but how could I possibly talk about PlayStation without talking about Lara Croft? You already know that I grew up with Tomb Raider 2. But there was so much more to that game than just locking the butler in the fridge. I wasn't very good at gaming as a child, which is not to say that I'm much improved now, but I remember the days when I'd sit down and watch me pa play TR2. It meant that I got to see the storyline play out without having to worry about my poorly coordinated little thumbs moving Lara into every fatal hazard available. I remember I always liked Venice the best, and it felt like such an achievement as I sat with the walkthrough guide pointing out where we needed to go next and what traps to watch out for, resulting in getting through levels. Due to my jumpy nature and the fact that I ran away at the first sight of a Rottweiler after Lara had had all her weapons taken away, it still felt to me like we were working as a team. Favourite parts in Tomb Raider 2 as a kid? I'd have to say the zipline at the end of the Great Wall of China level, taking the speedboat around Venice, and riding the snowmobile in Tibet. I do now have a much greater appreciation for how difficult they made it lining the snowmobile up for that jump though. If you know, you know. Guys, I'm breaking out all the phrases people used to death this past decade. You may have noticed I'm using "if you know, you know" this episode, and I don't even care if I'm wedging it in where it doesn't really fit. That sounds like a euphemism for something else. But speaking of wedging it in, how about a quick word from our sponsor? Just kidding, of course. We have no sponsor. What we do have is the next game I want to talk to you about. I was a very sickly child, I don't mind telling you, and one particular evening, after a hard day's puking my guts up, you can imagine the vomiting sound in theme park was really welcome. But still, I sunk plenty of time into this bullfrog title as a bairn, and to begin with, I didn't even know what I was doing. It is with great shame that I must now confess that I didn't find the research screen straight away, meaning I was stuck with only the 4 starting rides for the longest time: the bouncy castle, the cup and saucers, the ghost train, and the treehouse. Invest in your park research though, and you'll be able to erect Ferris wheels, banana boat rides, a monorail, and, given this is theme park, of course you can build a roller coaster. You can even win awards for having the highest and longest roller coaster in the world. Your theme park won't just have rides though. You'll also want to include shops to get your park visitors spending more money while on site. Again, with the right research, you'll be able to unlock more and more different types of shops. Ooh, you'll be serving up soft whip iced creams at Wally's Ices. Your burger shop will be serving, well, burgers if you hadn't guessed already. And you'll even be able to open a saloon that sells beer. Over 18s only, please. Theme park isn't just about plonking down rides and amenities. You'll also need to keep your shops stocked, manage your ticket prices on the gates, negotiate pay awards for your staff, and there's even a chance to invest and buy shares in rival theme parks. Juggle all this well, and your business will flourish, allowing you to sell up and go start a new park overseas. Fail to balance the books though, and you'll have to watch what is an incredibly dark cinematic, particularly for a game with an artistic style that would seem so appealing to kids. Honest to Bethlehem, you'll get a black and white animation of your desk, only you're not sat behind it. The funeral march music plays, it's raining outside, and then a flash of lightning illuminates the room and casts a shadow of your hanging body on the wall. I think it's time we were moving on. And we've got some of my favourite games to cover next, kicking things up a gear with Road Rash. And it was the PS1 game that made me fall in love with the franchise. Loading up the disc and being hit with Soundgarden's Rusty Cage as the title cinematic plays out, you knew you were in for a good time. I mentioned the soundtrack when I included Road Rash in my top 10 favourite games list, and I presented that list in a podcast just a few weeks ago. Episode 28 or 29, I think. But while the music is a massive selling point, it was the gameplay that kept me enthralled, and I would frequently sit and play until my eyes were bright red and itchy as anything. I don't know if it was the polygonal graphics of the first PlayStation's capabilities, or the fact that I was playing on a CRT, but given how often I would strain my eyes to this extent, It's an absolute wonder that I don't need glasses. Real talk for a minute. I always raced as Axel, because he starts out with a bike chain to attack his rivals with while out racing, and for my money, that's the best weapon in the game. But alas, I don't want to repeat myself too much, so we'll get right on to the next game I want to talk about. And this one also features in my top 10 games of all time to date. I mean, it makes sense if I rate them so highly. Of course I want to talk about them in relation to my childhood when I fell in love with them for the first time. Last time I talked about Time Crisis, I think I primarily focused on the main arcade quest, in which you, Richard Miller, take the fight to Gerudo Garrow and Wild Dog in order to save the kidnapped daughter of the president of Cercia, and ultimately thwart a coup that would threaten democracy on the island nation. There is another adventure to play through which takes you through a hotel that's fronting an illegal arms dealership and is suspected of concealing missiles. In this story, you're really made to feel like a James Bond-style secret agent, pulling your sports car into the hotel car park and then blowing every villainous henchman away if they try to get between you and your target, Cantaris. Time Crisis, for the uninitiated, is a rail shooter, the type of game that inspired my channel name. And, as a kid, it was an incredible feeling getting to play through with the light gun peripheral. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't immediately taken with this game, but after spending enough time with it, I realised I'd developed a love for the rail shooter, even if I've never really developed any skill with them. Now lastly, for today's talk, is a game that I hadn't thought of to talk about, primarily because I was planning on including Soviet Strike, another of my all-time favourite games, but then I got thinking, and I remembered just how much time my sibling and I gave to Capcom's Trick and Snowboarder. The title tells you that this is a snowboarding game, but there are different events for you to compete in, including halfpipes, a ski jump, or just standard mountain descent. The focus of the game is to pull off as many tricks as possible before crossing the finish line, and as kids, we would spend hours competing to best one another's high scores. The game includes a split-screen multiplayer experience, so these competitions played out in real time, and we'd show so much focus on pulling off somersaults and various aerial displays that we wouldn't even be paying attention to how the other one was doing until the final scores were in. The other interesting feature in Trick and Snowboarder is that, where this is a Capcom game, it's possible to unlock characters from one of their other franchises, Resident Evil, and you could be hitting the slopes as Leon Kennedy or Claire Redfield, or even as a zombie policeman. Guys, I've really enjoyed taking this romp down memory lane with you again. Naturally, the story doesn't stop here, but this week's episode does. So thank you all for listening, and I will catch you again very soon. But until then, bye!